What a joy to be here with you. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. Although I noticed when they mentioned that I was in the top 100 apologists, none of you seemed impressed. That's because in your mind, you're thinking, I didn't even know there were 100 apologists. Well, our topics this weekend on the Bible, the resurrection, the problem of evil, is there such a thing as truth? In some ways, it's harder to find more important foundational topics than this. So I figured I'd start off our experience together with a verse I know you're familiar with in John 14:6, where Jesus says, I am one of the ways, one of the truths, and one possible life. If you want to come to the Father or the Mother through me, that's cool. Go forth living according to whatever feels good to you. You do you, live your truth. I just heard an amen, which makes me really nervous. Clearly, Jesus didn't say live your truth. You know, there's at least 100 verses in the New Testament that directly or indirectly makes the claim that Jesus is the only way to get to God. Jesus seemed to think that truth and what you and I believe about it is pretty important. So have you ever just stopped and thought, why does truth even matter? I was given a talk similar to this years ago, and as soon as I was done, this high school student came right up to me. He goes, Mr. McDowell, you just talked about truth for an hour. Why does truth even matter? I said, well, do you want the true answer or the false answer? See, we all know that truth matters, but we live in a culture that suppresses certain things our hearts tell us is true, kind of like taking a beach ball and pushing it down. But if we pay attention to it, we can see those truths clearly. Truth matters. In fact, the Apostle Paul put it this way. He said, and with the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they do not receive the love of truth so as to be saved. Paul says eternity is at stake for what we believe about truth. Now, if I asked you to raise your hands if you love truth, everybody would raise their hands. But one thing I've learned is talk is cheap, and so is tweeting something and social media. We know what somebody really believes if they're willing to suffer for it, if it costs them something. That's how we know. So my question is, do you really love truth? Well, let me give you 3 reasons, somewhat explicitly, that help us understand why truth matters so much. One reason is because truth has consequences. Truth has consequences. My uncle is a pastor. Now he's a retired pastor in Massachusetts. And he told me a story about a cousin of mine I never met, a distant cousin of mine. And this cousin would go walking on the train tracks out where they lived, same time every day. But you see, my cousin was deaf. And he got up one morning and it never occurred to him that they would change the times that the train came. So he believed one thing, and those beliefs were false. The train actually came while he was walking on it. He couldn't hear the warning, couldn't stop at time. It actually struck and killed my cousin, largely because he had false information. Friends, truth has consequences. You might say, well, that's pretty dramatic, but have you ever just stopped and thought about how moment by moment, you actually live your life based on what you think is true? Okay, what time is that conference? Where is that conference? On and on and on, we base decisions on what we think is true. And when we're wrong, there's consequences. That's in part why Hosea 4:6, the minor prophet, said, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. If you don't have truth in your health, you'll destroy your health. If you don't have truth in a relationship, you'll destroy a relationship. If you don't have truth in your finances, you'll destroy your finances. If our country keeps suppressing things that are true, it's going to wreck our country and beyond. Truth has consequences. But there's a second reason why truth matters. In fact, I'm gonna actually ask everybody to close your eyes. Seriously, close your eyes right where you're at. And with your eyes closed, point the direction you think is north? Keep your eyes closed. Now, with your hands still pointed, open up and look around. I think this section has somebody pointing quite literally every direction. Now, I have no sense of direction. I don't actually know what direction north is, but despite where some of you pointed, it is not straight up. I know that. Now, what might you have if you wanted to know what direction north is? A compass or the app on your smartphone, right? You see, truth is a compass for life. If you're trying to get up to Washington instead of down south to my state of California, you better know what direction north is. And if you miss it, you'll end up somewhere else. So you might say truth has negative to keep us from consequences, but when we know what is true, it actually tells us what direction we should go and how we should orient our lives. A number of years ago, my mom got a new computer and a new email system, and she decided to set it up herself. Some of you are chuckling, already knowing where this might go. So my mom is setting up her email system, and one of the first instructions said, close all the windows. My mom's given me permission to share this, but she actually got up from her chair, walked around the house, and closed all the physical windows in the house. This was a number of years ago. She came back, my sister was home, and when my mom told her, she literally fell on the floor and couldn't stop laughing for like an hour. Now, you know something about a computer. When it says close all the windows, it doesn't mean the physical windows in your house. A computer has been designed to function a certain way. And when we're confused about it, frustration, embarrassment, and probably anger for not understanding something. But when you know what a computer is designed for and what it means, we can use it according to its purpose and, in a sense, be free. See, this is in part why Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. See, when we learn the truth about something and use it accordingly, then it brings freedom. So think about it this way. Have you ever noticed the first thing we learn about God in the Bible is not that God is holy, not that God is just or love or merciful, but the Bible starts with, in the beginning, God created. The first thing we're told about God is that God is a creator. Why does that matter? Because God has built the world with truth built into it, purpose built into it. Like a computer, when we know that truth and orient our lives to it, then we're set free. I actually think one of the biggest lies today is about freedom. Freedom is doing whatever I want to do, however I feel. Friends, that is not freedom. There's no freedom without truth. G.K. Chesterton, the great British writer, said, you can free a camel from the zoo, but don't free it from its hump. Having a hump is in part what it means to be a camel. We have to understand what something is, and then we know how we should treat it, how it should act, and how it should live. That's why truth matters. That's why truth matters. By the way, Jesus claimed to be the truth, and Satan is the father of what? Lies. So first off, truth has consequences, but second, when we know what is true, it's like a compass for life that should direct and orient our steps and shape how we live. And that's what it means to be free, is to live according to our design. There's a third reason why truth matters, and it's because believing is not enough. You say, what do you mean believing is not enough? Look, nothing is true because you believe it. Don't believe me? You know how many times I believed I was 6'8" and in the NBA? I'm only 6'7". On this stage, maybe. Doesn't matter how much I believe it. I believe there's $1 million in my wallet. Even if there were, my great state of California would take half of it anyways. Hey, and don't laugh, by the way. When it comes to policies, you and I are in the same boat. Nothing's true because you believe it. In fact, think about it this way. You can have your own beliefs, but you cannot have your own truth. You can have your own beliefs, but you cannot have your own truth. Now, to distinguish between those two, we have to clarify what we mean by truth. So I'm going to give you a simple definition that I think as you reflect upon it, you'll find very helpful. And it's what philosophers call the correspondence theory of truth. In other words, a statement is true if it matches up with reality. So if you have a belief and it corresponds to reality, then your belief is what? True. If it doesn't, your belief is false. So if I told you that I drove here from Southern California and it only took me 9 hours because I drove here in my new red Lamborghini. And you go walking outside and you see this, my statement just might be what? Okay, humor me. I don't have a Lamborghini. Might be true. Now, if you walk outside and you see this, my statement would be what? False. Why? Because I said it's red, but it's yellow. Now, if you walk outside and see the kind of car that I actually drive, which is this, why are you laughing? I gave a talk like this, and 8th grader goes, you drive a Ford. I was like, what do you drive? Man. Now, I actually play this game with my kids. Games like this, and you can tell I love superheroes looking at my computer. On the bottom, you have a word, and then you have an object. If you have a correspondence, that's Wolverine, that's Batman, and that's Spider-Man. You have truth. So truth is when a belief matches up with, is that smoke on the back? No, I'm just kidding. What'd you do when I said that, by the way? Most of you turned around and you looked. Since there wasn't smoke in the back, don't worry. My statement is what? It's false. If there really were, my statement would have been true. That's what we mean by truth. Now, you might be sitting there going, okay, Sean, I don't remember from Philosophy 101 that definition of truth, but what you said seems pretty obvious, and it should be pretty obvious. All of us live our lives as if we have a belief, and if it matches up with the real world, it's true, and if it doesn't, it's false. So somebody asks you, hey, what'd you do tonight? And you say, I went and watched the NBA games. You all know you said something that was false unless you're secretly watching it on your phone. Now, the Bible doesn't define truth this way, but the Bible assumes it. In fact, the 9th commandment is do not what? Lie. Do not deceive, in a sense. Now, what's a lie? An intentional misrepresentation of the truth. So you can't have a lie unless there's something that's true. Now, this probably feels obvious to you, and it should. Guess what? Everybody uses the correspondence theory of truth in their daily life. You can't not use it. But when the topic shifts to moral values and religion, people will change what they mean by truth. Let me say it again. Everybody uses truth the way we defined it. But when it shifts to ethics, religion, and now identity, people will change what they mean by truth. So let's break this down. I'm curious, you can just shout it out. What would some of you say is the best flavor of ice cream? Vanilla, chocolate chip. I heard strawberry, I heard sherbet. Sorry, not an ice cream. Okay, I've heard a few. Let me save you the time. The best flavor of ice cream is chocolate peanut butter. Now, by show of hands, who says that is true? Let me see your hands. Who says that is false or not true? Okay, I'm confused. How can the statement chocolate peanut butter ice cream is the best be true for me, but not true for most of you? And the answer is because we're talking about something we call subjective. You see, subjective claims are personal and they're private, and they depend upon the beliefs or preferences of an individual. Now, within the word subjective, what's actually the key word? Subject, good. The individual. So think of subjective claims as internal to the mind of the subject. Okay, so when you think of subjective claims, I want you to think of ice cream. Because ice cream preference, if you say one is the best, that we might say is true for you, but not true for someone else, because we're talking about subjective claims. What if I said this? What if I said chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes? I heard one amen, which tells me there's some Baptists here. That's good. Now you laugh because you know this is a very different kind of claim, isn't it? This is a very different kind of claim. This is not a subjective preference claim. This is what we call an objective claim. See, objective claims are about the external world independent of what someone believes. So the key word in objective is what? Object, exactly. So subjective claims are about the subject. Objective claims are about the object. Okay, so if I said LeBron James is 6'9", that's about the object. If I said LeBron James is fun to watch, now that's about me, the subject, whether I enjoy it or not. Do you see the difference? So if I had a big scoop of chocolate peanut butter ice cream here, and I said, this ice cream is delicious, is that really about the object, or is it about my experience of the object? That's subjective, that's my experience. If I said this is 20 grams, what's that about? The object, good. That's an objective claim about the object. So when you think of subjective claims, I want you to think of ice cream. When you think of objective claims, I want you to think of insulin, because insulin is actually a kind of medicine to help control diabetes. All right, with that said, I'm gonna ask you to participate here with me for a moment, and I'm gonna put some statements on the screen. If it's a subjective claim, I just want you to shout out ice cream. If it's an objective claim, shout out insulin. Now, I'm not asking if these claims are true or false, very important. I'm simply asking what kind of claim is it? If it's subjective, ice cream. If it's objective, all right, let's give it a shot. Coke tastes better than Pepsi. Okay, good. Even if you don't like Coke or Pepsi, you know that is a subjective ice cream type claim. It's a matter of preference. Good. Diet Coke has fewer calories than regular Coke. Okay, good. This isn't a preference claim. This is about the object, the Coke or the soda itself, and a property that it has, or at least allegedly has. Good. Ice cream or insulin, 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, good. I'm not sure I've had a single person shout out ice cream for math, although they're trying to change it in my state. If there's anything we know is mind independent and objective, it's math. So you're right, that's an insulin claim. How about this one? Hawaii is the most beautiful vacation spot on earth. Ice cream, okay, good. We all know it's Southern California. By the way, the claim a rose is beautiful. If you don't think that is an objective claim that's true, you're just as wrong as if you don't think 2 + 2 = 4. I'm dead serious. But I digress. We could come back to that. Look, God is beautiful. God actually is beautiful in his character, which means beauty is an objective part of the world that we discover. We could come back to that if you want to. All right, ice cream or insulin? George Washington was the first president in the United States. Okay, good. Now this isn't a mathematical claim. What kind of claim is this? It's historical. So you can't see this the way you could allegedly see smoke in the back, or you could see 2 apples and 2 apples equals 4 apples. But we all know things in the past have a mind-independent reality, so to speak. So you're right. Historical claims are like insulin. Action movies are more enjoyable than romances. Okay, good. Now some of you guys are like, that's insulin. Look, I've been married 24 years, not worth dying on that hill. Ice cream or insulin? Sean McDowell can bench press 300 pounds. Who says ice cream? Who says insulin? Who says after the 2020 elections, you'll never vote again? I'm kidding. Sadly, it's tempting, but don't succumb to it. Now, notice something very important. Do you know how many pounds I can bench press? No, you don't. To know if this is ice cream or insulin, do you have to know how many pounds I can bench press? No. I'm not asking you if this is true or false. I'm asking you, what kind of claim is this? Is this a preference claim that can be true for you but not true for me? Or is this a claim about the actual objective world? You see, don't confuse not knowing if something is true or false with it therefore being subjective. That's not the same thing. So if I said there's 50 quadrillion, zillion atoms in the universe, that is an objective claim about the universe, but we'll never be able to test it. That's still an objective claim. I mean, if I said Abraham Lincoln spat in a puddle on a certain day, we'll probably never be able to confirm or deny that, but that claim is true or it's false. That's still an objective claim, right? So this is an objective claim. And we could test it, right? We could throw on some 45s and see if I can do it. But the answer is yes or no, and your beliefs don't change it. It's an objective claim. I know some of you are thinking, yeah, but can you? Here's the deal. I cared before I turned 40. Now I just want to stay alive. Ice cream or insulin? Earth is the center of the solar system. Okay, insulin, you hesitated because this statement is what? It's false. It's false. Can you have a false insulin claim? Of course you can. If I said George Washington was the second president of the United States, that's still about George Washington or about the second presidency of the United States. I just got that objective claim wrong. If I said 2 + 2 = 5, that's an objective claim, but it's false. So don't confuse something being false with all of a sudden therefore being subjective. By the way, this isn't a historical claim or a mathematical claim. What kind of claim is this? It's a scientific claim. Good. So far, the vast majority of you have told me that historical claims and mathematical claims and scientific claims are like insulin, not ice cream. I want everybody to respond to this one. Ice cream or insulin, abortion is wrong. Ooh, I got a muddled answer on that one. Who says ice cream? Who says insulin? All right, now put your hands down. This is not a scientific claim, although science may help bear on it. It's not a mathematical claim. This is a moral claim. Are moral claims all like ice cream in matters of preference? Or do moral claims deal with a mind-independent, objective reality? Do you understand the question? A number of years ago, I had a conversation with I don't know if I'd call him a friend, a guy I met, and on the topic of abortion. He said something to the effect of, if you don't like abortion, don't have one. I said, sorry to point out the obvious, but I can't. I actually think sarcasm is a spiritual gift. In fact, I would argue that it's the 6th love language. Notice what he did. He shifted the question of the morality of abortion. If you don't like it, don't get one. If you don't like chicken, get steak. If you don't like coffee, get tea. If you don't like abortion, don't have one. So I asked him a question. I said, "Sir, I'm curious. Are you against slavery?" He looked at me like I was crazy. He said, "Of course." I said, "Well, then if you don't like slavery, don't own a slave." Do we object to slavery because we don't like it? I don't like chicken, I really don't like coffee, and I really don't like slavery. Or do we object to slavery because we know it's objectively wrong to own and mistreat another human being based on something secondary like skin color? Friends, we know morality is like insulin, not ice cream. How can I say this? Because Romans chapter 2 says, even people without the law know it because it's what? Written on their hearts. It's written on their hearts, on our consciences. My dad said to me years ago, he said, "Son, you know what someone believes about morality? Not by what they say, not by what they do, but by how they want to be treated." And I was like, that's brilliant. Because people will break a promise to you, but the moment you break a promise to them, they'll cry foul. In fact, my friend Frank Turk said, you know what someone believes about morality? Not by their actions, but by their reactions. And he's right. That's why I never believe somebody when they tell me they're a relativist. They're pushing the beach ball down, and the truth is going to pop up. So years ago, when I was teaching high school full-time, before I started teaching at Biola, my students came in after school, these are high school students, and they said, "Hey, Mr. McDowell, this public school in our town, like a mile or two down the road, had this big atheist free-thinking event, and 100 students showed up to hear about it. What do you want to do?" We came up with the idea in our Christian school that we would have 3 of my students challenge 3 of these atheist students to a public debate in our church about historical Jesus, intelligent design, evolution, and morality, and they accepted. So we had it in our church, it was packed out, I moderated it, and one of my students who I had trained got up and said, "We know there's right and wrong. We expect people to follow moral codes. And we believe in right and wrong and morality because there's a moral law. And the best explanation for a moral law is that there's a moral law giver." She sat down. One of their students who was an agnostic said, "There's no objective moral law. Morality is all like ice cream. It's all a matter of preference. You live according to your views and I live according to mine." And he sat down. Well, then fast forward a little bit, it was time for the closing speeches. And the student got up there who had said something effective morality being subjective, and he stood behind the podium and he noticed it was primarily Christian audience. And instead of summing up the debate, he looked out at the audience and said, "You Christians are a bunch of bigots, you're hateful, you're homophobic, shame on you." Repeated himself for 2 minutes and he sat down. Now, do you notice anything ironic? There's no objective moral law, but you hateful, bigoted, immoral Christians have violated every moral law and you should have acted differently. His worldview said there's no right and wrong, but he couldn't help from living it out because his worldview was suppressed in the beach ball and the truth always pops up. Look, let's ask this question for a second. What is the question of abortion at its core? I want to imagine, so imagine tonight you go home and you decide to do the dishes. Okay, now for some of you, this is going to take a lot of imagination. You decide to do dishes, younger brother and sister or grandchild comes up behind you and says, "Mom, Dad, sis, Papa, can I kill this?" Now, before you say yes or no, what question would you ask? What is it? If it's a roach, you'd be like, "Hurry up." If it's a hamster, you'd be like, "Why do you want to kill a hamster? That's messed up. The thing's kind of cute." If they're like, "Oh, it's a kid, I pulled it out of the carriage down the street," you'd be like, "Whoa, time out." The answer is no, and even though you're 5, you need serious counseling. Now, why should we treat a roach differently than a hamster, and both of them differently than a human being? The answer is because of what it is. How we treat something should reflect what it is. That's why the Nazis, when they wanted to exterminate the Jews, had to dehumanize them so they could justify treating them accordingly. Friends, either the unborn is human or it's not. Either humans have a right to life or they don't. Those are objective claims about the world. And the mere fact that people differ tells us nothing about whether those claims are dealing with objective reality. And you know what? If all morality was like ice cream, you couldn't judge anybody for doing anything morally wrong. Now, I'm raising this issue not to make a political point, but I'll tell you that the tragedy of what's happening in Israel right now and in Gaza should move all of us in different ways to tears. But I want to make a point that's interesting. There are people that will take different sides of this conflict. But what I haven't heard anybody say is, you know what, I'm on the side of pro-genocide. I'm in favor of genocide. Now, some believe Israel's doing it. Some believe Hamas is doing it. My point is not even to step into that debate, but everybody agrees that you shouldn't do that, which tells me nobody is really a relativist. We know there's right and we know there's wrong, even though sometimes we suppress it and sometimes we don't want to follow it. By the way, if morality was like ice cream, what would that do to the gospel? There'd be no reason for Jesus to die. Now, come back with me for a second. Ice cream or insulin? Jesus was a carpenter. Insulin. Jesus died on the cross in AD 30. Insulin. Jesus resurrected as proof he is divine. Insulin. That is a historical claim with theological, religious implications. Now, I'm going to say something to make sure we're clear and all on the same page. I hope everybody here knows that nobody dies and goes to hell just for not believing in Jesus. You know that, right? Nobody dies and goes to hell just because they don't believe in Jesus. According to the scriptures, people die and spend eternity separated from God because of a rebellion against their creator, because of a moral virus the Bible calls sin. And to say that Buddha or Krishna or Muhammad or any other religious figure can forgive your sins is like saying chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes. It doesn't work in the objective, real world. I mean, have you ever really asked the question, why is Jesus the only way? In our age right now, two of the biggest ethics that are preached to the next generation are diversity and inclusiveness. Jesus comes along and goes, yep, I'm the only way to get to God. Doesn't sound very inclusive. Why is Jesus the only way? The answer is actually somewhat simple. Jesus is the only way to get to God because Jesus is the only one that fixed the problem that separates us from God. The problem is sin. There's an objective moral law rooted in God's character. God is the moral, just, and loving ruler of the universe, and sin separates us from a holy God. And Jesus, living a sinless life as the God-man, paid the debt we cannot pay and offers us salvation as a free gift if we're humble enough by faith to accept it. Look, think about it this way. If your car runs out of gas, it doesn't do any good to rotate the tires. Get new spark plugs, drop a few $1,000 for new transmission, and it certainly isn't going to do any good to plug in an EV charger. You got to identify the problem and fix it. Jesus is the only way because he's the only one that got to the root of the problem in the world and fixed it. Every belief system identifies something at the root of the problem of the world. New Age says we are gods within, and the problem is we've forgotten that we are God. Marxism says the core of the problem in the world is capitalism. We have haves and we have have-nots. The problem is out there, so if we fix it out there, we'll have a pure and just society. Buddhism says the problem in the world is that we have desires, and these desires create suffering. So if we follow the eightfold path, we can purge ourselves of our desires. Jesus said, the heart of the problem is the problem of the heart. Jesus said the heart of the problem is the problem of the heart in rebellion against God, and sin separates us from God. And Jesus is the only one that fixed the problem. But what's unique about Christianity is it's not the kind of belief system that can be true for you, but not true for me. In fact, Paul writes this. He says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless. You're still in your sins. You know what that means? Paul wrote this in AD 55, 25 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, when there were still people around who would have been eyewitnesses. He says, hey, everybody, if we found the body of Jesus, we're lying and our faith is worthless and we're to be pitied. He tied the truth of Christianity to a single testable historical event that we're gonna look at the evidence for tomorrow. That's radical. You know what that means? That means if you were there with, say, the women when they didn't believe or they weren't sure and they went to the tomb, you could have seen 1.5 tons stone rolled away, ducked inside, smelled the scent of a musty tomb, and seen the linen cloth of Jesus laying there. If you're there at the cross, you could reach down and touch the cross and maybe got a splinter on your hand and felt the trickle of warm blood coming down. If you're there with Thomas, who said, I will not believe unless I can see and touch the wounds in his side and in his hands, you could have reached out and touched the wounds. Friends, Christianity is not the kind of system that can be true for you, but not true for me. Either it's true or it's false. Either you believe it or you don't. That's the reality. And what did Jesus say? He said, by the way, you know how many questions we have of Jesus in the Bible? 340 in the Gospels. Mark asked 262 questions. Interestingly, Jesus was asked about 183 questions, and he directly answered about 7 or 8. He did. The God who made our brains communicates with us through stories and through questions. But the most important question of all is, who do you say that I am? Now, what's different about Christianity is Christianity doesn't say, look within to the answers for that. It says, look without. When the apostles started proclaiming that Christianity is true, they said, this Jesus fulfilled prophecy. This Jesus did miracles. This Jesus was buried and he rose on the third day and we saw him. Christianity invites an investigation of the evidence. Now, I do think Christianity is uniquely the most existentially satisfying religion as well, but we will get there tomorrow. Right now, it's important to see that Jesus didn't say, I'm one of the ways, one of the truths, and one possible life. What did he say? He said, I'm the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to Father but by me. And this weekend, we're gonna look at his claims and see if the Bible and the resurrection really hold up to that test. Greg and Christy, I believe we've got some questions pouring in, probably more than we can take, but let's do as many as we can and try to get down to it. Should I scoot over this way? How's that?
Yeah, that'll work.
Oh, I'm gonna steal my water right there. I always feel like Marco Rubio when I reach for the water. Remember that?
Let's go over here.
Yeah. We do have a lot of questions coming in. Thank you for those. And some of them, Sean, are, we're gonna see how you do.
Oh, I like this. I like this. Let's go.
Okay, this one just came in just a few minutes ago, and I I think this is a provocative question.
Okay.
How can being against slavery, so they're interacting with your ice cream insulin analogy. Yep. How can being against slavery not be an ice cream statement, considering that the Bible goes into how to treat your slave in a biblical manner? Does that mean if there's no mistreatment of the slave, that slavery is not wrong?
Okay, this is a huge question that is going to require way more unpacking than I can give here. One key point that I would make is, although we talk about slavery in the Bible, that's very different than kind of modern, so to speak, chattel slavery. Same word, not the same thing. So there's a distinction we're going to have to make between the two of those. So same word, but you can't just map on the way slavery took place here. And slavery in the Old Testament that was often voluntary, wasn't race-based, and had some other significant differences. But even if we take the Old Testament without unpacking this further, it says there's a way to treat a slave, right? Which implies there's a right way and there's a wrong way, which implies there's right and implies there's wrong. So don't confuse the question of, does the Bible endorse slavery, with the question, is slavery dealing with an objective moral good or an objective moral wrong? Those are separate questions. And so without going into detail why the Bible would allow something we refer to as slavery, even the question itself assumes that there's a morality behind it. Insofar as this talk, that's the only point I was trying to make.
Great.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, this question just came in. It says, so can you be considered saved if you reject certain truths in the Bible, such as homosexuality, what the Bible talks about with homosexuality?
Okay, so all I can operate on is the question that you gave me. So can somebody be saved if they reject what the Bible teaches about homosexuality? It seems like this person recognizes that the Bible has clear moral teachings, wants to be saved, but explicitly rejects what the Bible teaches. That's problematic to me. Now, I can't judge anybody's heart. Fortunately, this is God's job, right? 1 Samuel 16:7, man judges the outward appearance, God judges the heart. So the question, is it possible? I'd say, okay, I guess it's possible. I don't know where you're at in your journey. I don't know why you reject it. I don't know exactly what you mean by the Bible and homosexuality. That's somewhat of a modern term. But 1 Corinthians 6 places those who practice same-sex sexual behavior in the category of those who will not inherit the kingdom of God. Now, that's not the only sin it puts there. If we pick that one out and ignore the others, then we're being hypocrites. But the Bible's very clear from Genesis to the end, God's design for sexuality. And so while it's possible, I would strongly resist the idea. And I would say, I guess I would ask this person, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I just say, okay, so you recognize the Bible teaches this. You recognize that the Bible is God's authoritative word, and yet you don't believe it. Help me understand how putting yourself as an authority over the Bible is consistent with being saved. That's what I would ask.
Yeah. Another really great question. There's so many. How do I reconcile the fact that so many atheists and agnostics believe that truth and true evidence leads them away from belief in God and the Bible?
So one of the things with not all, but many atheists is that they will agree with us that there's objective truth. They'll say, yeah, evidence matters. There's objective truth. They'll just differ with you and I over what is true. But most atheists are not postmodernists that'll say, well, that might be your truth, but here's my truth. As a whole, although there's exceptions. I'm going to answer this broadly, is that biblically speaking, the primary reason people reject God is not a lack of evidence. I said a minute ago, the heart of the problem is the problem of the heart. Jesus gives pretty radical claims about what we do with our time and our bodies and our lives. And so people can resist beliefs for a lot of reasons. It can be for moral reasons. It can be because of somebody's will. It can be emotionally. There can be hurt that's there. There can be relationally. So there's a whole lot of reasons why people believe what they believe and don't believe what they don't believe that goes beyond the evidence itself. I think God has given enough evidence for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, but he's not going to force anybody to believe. I mean, even the rich young ruler walked away from Jesus. He walked away from Jesus. I mean, my goodness, in John 11, they raised Lazarus from the dead. That's pretty good evidence. They want to kill Lazarus, poor guy already died once, and run Jesus out of town. That's really good evidence. Now, don't hear me saying I'm uniquely picking on atheists. This is a human problem. We believe things as a whole that are convenient and are part of our tribe, but when it comes to God, I would just say there's a lot more at stake. You're not just believing a math or historical truth. Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me. Quite literally, everything is at stake.
Well, thank you. Okay, so how do I engage with my friends? Yeah, I know, I'm gonna scoot this chair too. Anyway, how do I engage with my friends or other people who tend to treat everything like an ice cream matter? You know?
Well, so I've met two people in my life that literally refuse to admit that anything's wrong. One was at Berkeley, no surprise. The other was at the University of Oregon. I'm just kidding. Although, were you surprised? I don't know. The other was at a university in Singapore. The vast majority of people, if you press enough, will have to concede that something is right and something is wrong. All you have to have is one example. So I didn't come up with this, but I'll say, is it okay to torture an innocent child for fun? No, somebody's like, why do you have to say for fun? I'm like, because somebody might say if there's a nuclear bomb and the only, like, okay, just to be sure, is it okay to torture an innocent child for fun? Now, the reality is, if you can't see that that's wrong, you don't need an argument. You need a therapist. We all know that's wrong. So if you're in an ongoing relationship with someone and they refuse to concede and make the point, I just wait for them to be like watching the news and go, I can't believe those people that are wrecking the environment. Go, okay, wait a minute, why are you upset? You believe morality is subjective. If they like to wreck the environment, why are you so upset about that? Or I can't believe that they're funding the war in Ukraine. That's so wrong with our money. Wait a minute, you just said you're a relativist. Eventually, everybody's going to make some kind of moral claim that's right or wrong. You can't live as a relativist. So I look for those opportunities. Look, they're pushing the beach ball down, and I'm telling you, you'll see signs when the beach ball pops up. And just point it out to them graciously.
Why are there so many religions if there's only one God?
It's an interesting question. So, what are religions? In a sense, they're man-made ways to kind of make sense of reality. Given how many diverse people there are from diverse places at different times with different experiences, you add that, number one. Number two, that the idea of God is written on our hearts. We know God exists. But number three, we all have a proclivity to suppress that. why wouldn't we have so many different religions? That seems to me the question we should ask. So given human nature and how fallen we are, and I think the Bible got it absolutely correct about how, Jesus said it's out of the heart that comes these things. Paul writes in Romans 3, no one does good, no, not one. The truest thing about us is that we are worshipers. The Bible doesn't start by giving us an argument for the existence of God. I'm an apologist. Sometimes I wish it did. It doesn't. It says, in the beginning, God. We all worship something. And if we don't worship God, we're going to worship something else. Work, the human body, power, some other false deity. So given human nature, that eternity is on our hearts, and how diverse human experience is, of course we'd expect to have so many different religions.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think this might be the last question. Okay.
We'll do one more. I'll be fast. I'll try.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so are people still accountable to the truth even if they don't know it?
Oh man, this is not one I can give a quick answer to.
Nice job, whoever wrote that.
So I guess it depends upon what that truth is. There's probably some cases where if you don't know something, you can't possibly be held accountable for it. Right? I won't use a bomb example. That just doesn't seem like it's going to land well. Well, I will. What if if there's a bomb under here and if I step on that, it blows it up. Well, I didn't know that. Am I accountable for that? No, I had no idea. So why would I be held accountable for that? But on the other hand, there's sins of omission and sins of commission. Sins we commit, but things we didn't do that we should have known. So this isn't a relativist answer. I think this is to say that there are some truths we can't be held accountable for if we don't know them, but there are some truths that we should know and can know if we pay attention to it, and thus can be held accountable for that, such as the existence of God. Romans 1 is in creation and on our hearts. So I think my best answer is in some cases yes, in some cases no.
One of the best ways to go deeper into some of this, and I'm sure many of you will want to, would be to pick up some of the books you brought with you, because you've given your life to answering these kinds of questions. Why don't you tell us about these books that you brought and give people a little flavor for them?
All right, so this talk that I just gave is kind of the opening chapters in this book, A Rebel's Manifesto. So I wrote this for students, and I got the 25 thorniest ethical issues, whether it's race, whether it's transgender, poverty, you name it. How do we think Christianly about this? And then despite our culture that wants to silence and shut down people who see the world differently, how do we lean in and live this out and have meaningful conversations? So if you thought through, how do I think about the life issue? How do I think about these tough issues today? That book is written for you, Rebel's Manifesto. This book is one I'm not giving a talk on, but wrote this with a friend of mine, a former atheist, cold case detective. It's called So the Next Generation Will Know. So this is for parents, grandparents, any adult who says, I just want kind of practical ideas to pass on my faith to the next generation. That's what this book is for. And then the next book, maybe I'll come back and talk about this more next time, but Evidence for Jesus is the 25 big questions about Jesus. One of them is, how do we know the Bible's true? After the break, we're gonna come back and talk about that. Another one is, how do we know Jesus actually resurrected? That's the topic of tomorrow. And then other questions like, how is Jesus the only way? Are there contradictions in the Bible, etc.? So those three are back there if they're helpful.